Okay, so as we try to focus on one pasuk that can help us with our avoda, and this time, as appropriate to the season, it'll help us with our avoda in Elul, in Rosh Hashanah, Aseret Yemei Tshuva, and that's the pasuk at the end of Nitzavim, where second to the last pasuk, Haidosi b'chem hayom es hashamayim es haaretz. Right, HaKadosh Baruch Hu made the shamayim and aretz witnesses, and now he tells us, oh, Shalom, Achaim v'amoves masati lefonecha. I've put life and death I've given before you. Habrocha v'haklala, the blessing and the curse. Ubacharta b'chaim, and you should choose life, leman tichi atov zarecha, so that you and your children will live. So Rashi brings an interesting mashal for this idea of ubacharta b'chaim, of choosing life. He says, Ani moreh lachem shetivchuru b'chelek hachayim. I am instructing you to choose the portion that's life. Don't choose death. Pick life. And this is the mashal he gives. The Adam ha'omer, right, the Bno, a person says to his son, B'char lecha chelek yofeh b'nachalasi. A person has his estate, and he wants to tell his son, if you have choice among my different fields, real estate, whatever it is, choose this one. This is the best. And he doesn't just tell him, he takes him for a walk and has him stand. He says, this is it. This field is gold. This is the one you want when they're dividing up this estate. And he says, Zeh b'rolecha. And about this, David HaMelech says the pasuk, Hashem menos chelki. Hashem is the one who's my portion, so to speak, v'kosi, and my kos, the one who holds the bracha. Atot tomich gorali. You support my choosing, right? A goral is like a lottery. Rashi explains it. Hinachta yodi al goral hatov. You didn't leave things to chance, right? There were a few lots that I could choose here. Hashem, you took my hand and you put it on the good one, and you said, pick this one, okay? Which is Chaim. Now, there's a phrase they use in the Gemara. Often they'll say, Atu b'shuftini askinan. Are we dealing with fools? In other words, the pasuk says, I've put Chaim and Moves lefonecha, life and death in front of you, bracha and klala. And then it tells you, Ubacharta b'chaim, choose life. And this is a special tova that Hashem is doing to us because we might get mixed up and we might not know which one to choose. And he takes our hand and he says, choose this one, choose life. Who's going to choose something else? If somebody says, would you like a cup of tea or cyanide? Who's taking the cyanide? Chaim v'moves, bracha and klala. Right? You line up outside the house of a big tzaddik, and there's a gabbai there. He says, would you like a bracha from the Rav, or would you like him to curse you? Who's going to pick the curse? But this is what it says here in the pasuk: Chaim v'moves v'sati lefonecha, bracha v'klala ubacharta b'chaim. So we're going to see two approaches to this tonight. Approach number one is that Chaim is not such a simple thing to define. We may be defining as life something that's really death. Okay, let's take a look at an interesting dialogue in Bereshis that kind of illustrates this. When Yaakov Avinu comes down to Mitzrayim, Yosef presents him before Paro, and Paro asks him a question. He says, Kami yamei shnei chayecha? How many are the days of the years of your life? In our Lashon, how old are you? And Yaakov Avinu answers, he gives such a long drasha. They say the definition of a nudnik is someone who asks him, Ma shlomcha, how are you? And he really tells you, right? Instead of just saying, Baruch Hashem, telling you about his back, he tells you about his relationships. And so here Yaakov says, Yemei shnei megurai shloshim u'ma'ashana. Says the days of my dwelling on earth were 130. Ma'at v'ro'im hoyu yemei shnei chayai. Few and poor were the days of the years of my life. Lo isigu es yemei shnei chayai v'oseh b'mei megureim. And they didn't reach the days of the years of life that my forefathers had in the days that they were dwelling. You imagine Paro like scratching his head politely, like, what was he saying? So the Malbim explains, right, the Torah didn't put down chit-chat. The Torah put down important discussions. And the Sfarim say even Russia was a person of content. Paro and Yaakov were having a discussion about what is life. So Yaakov Avinu corrected Paro, says the Malbim. He says, you think that life is simply physical existence on this world. That's not the way I define life. I call that Yemei Shnei Megurai, dwelling on the planet. Getting up, eating breakfast, brushing my teeth, whatever I do, that's what you call dwelling on the world, but that's not really life. Life is something that even while you're existing on this world, you can have a lot of it, or you can have a little of it. My forefathers had a lot, quantitatively and qualitatively. I unfortunately didn't. What means life to Yaakov Avinu? So it says, when they told Yaakov Avinu that Yosef was alive, V'atechi ruach Yaakov Avinu. Yaakov's spirit came alive. Rashi says, Shorsal of Ruach HaKodesh. He had, once again, the Ruach HaKodesh that left him when he was in his state of mourning over the loss of Yosef. So what life is to Yaakov Avinu is like what the Pasuk says, V'atem advekim b'Hashem Elokeichem chaim kulchem hayom. Someone who is connected to Hashem is alive. Someone who is just dwelling their physical existence isn't necessarily alive. Chazal also tell us that Rishoyim in their lifetime are called Mason, are called dead. Tzaddikim, even when they're dead, are called alive. Right? Imagine a poor kid goes to first grade in school and the teacher teaches him, Kinderlef, there's a din, a judgment coming on Rosh Hashanah, and the tzaddikim get written down in a book that's called the Book of Life. And the Rishonim get written down in a book that's called the Book of Death. Okay, the day after Rosh Hashanah, Tzom Gedalia, there are announcements going along. The funeral of the great Gaon and Tzaddik Rav so-and-so is going to take place in a few hours. So the little boy thinks he must have been a Rasha. Yesterday was Rosh Hashanah. They said he's a big Gaon and Tzaddik, but obviously it was written down in the Book of Death. They have a neighbor who's a mafioso called Louis the Louse or something like this. And the boy watches him carefully all year and he's happy and doing fine. So somehow Louis must be a tzaddik, right? Because he was written down in the Book of Life. Either that or my mother was lying to me. So the answer is that the Chaim that we're talking about is that Dvekim b'Hashem Elokeichem. It's not just the idea of physical existence. Certainly we're people who want physical existence, who want to live every moment we can in this world. Rabbi Isaac Sher says that the answer, when it says, Yiras Hashem alamedchem, when David HaMelech says, I'll teach you Yiras Hashem, the answer is, Mi ha'isha chavetz chaim oiv yomim liras tov. Who is a person who loves life, who wants to see good in his days? Jewish people want to live, certainly, but we want to fill that life with content. It isn't just the idea of breathing and digesting, but it's being able to be connected to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in our life. So therefore, when we ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu, when we're really thinking of what we want, we may think that's life, but maybe it really isn't. How many times does a person meet a frum Jew and say, you really got no life? How do you live like that? You don't do this, you don't do that, you don't do that. You've got no life, right? And in their eyes, that's true. So therefore, this idea of the Chaim and Mavis, the Bracha and Klola, can be very confusing to know which is which. Now, there's a beautiful, I'm not an expert at all in Diktuk. There's a beautiful word based on Diktuk that illustrates this. The Tolner Rebbe brings it down. He heard it from Rav Shlomo Goldstoff, who was the son-in-law of the Chabino Rav, lived here in Rechavia. Right? He lived here. Now, he said like this. The Mishnah Berurah brings down from the Tur that when we start saying Zochrenu L'chaim, we're supposed to be careful to say it with a L, with a Shva, and not a La, a Patach. Why? This comes from the Maram of Rottenberg, who's brought down in the Tur, because saying La Chaim, the prefix La in Lashon Kodesh, sometimes means lo. It means not. Okay? He brings an example in Nedarim. If a person said this behema will be La Chulin, that means lo Chulin. It won't be plain, but rather it will be hekdesh. Okay? So that's why you have to be careful with your pronunciation. Don't say Zachrenu La Chaim. Remember, it's for non-life. Bad move. Right? You want to say L'chaim. But the Chabino Rav asked, wait a second. when we say Tfilas Tal and Tfilas Geshem, the Chazanim like to really show their stuff. And they go, L'chaim v'loi la moves. So now let's plug that in. La moves. La moves then would be lo moves. But we say lo moves, a double negative is a positive. It sounds like we're saying L'chaim, but we're also asking for not non-death, which would be death. So he said the answer is, right, that we're asking for a certain quality of life. There's a certain type of definition of life that's simply lo moves. I'm not dead. That's a very low common denominator for life. That should not be what we mean when we say Zachreinu L'chaim. People twist it in their minds. They turn that beautiful bakasha Zachreinu L'chaim into Hashem, don't kill me. Baruch Hu doesn't want to kill you. Right? Racham yechaper oven v'lo yashchis. Lo achpotz b'mos hameis kim b'shuva midarko v'choya. We want somebody to die. We want him to do tshuva and to live. Right? So when we're saying Zachreinu L'chaim, we're not just saying, I don't want to die. We're saying, no, I want to live. I want to really live. And that's the idea of the content. So therefore, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu helps us and tells us and says, Uvacharta b'chaim, that means I'm telling you something very specific. Look in my Torah. Look and see how Chaim is defined and choose that. Because otherwise you might inadvertently be choosing the wrong decision, the wrong choice in there, which can be very bad. So that's the first approach to this very strange pasuk, which seems to give us a choice that's what they call a no-brainer. Hachayim v'amoves masati lefanecha, habrocha v'aklolo, ubacharta b'chaim leman tichya tov zarech. Approach number 2 comes to us from, really I saw it first in the Ohr Hachaim Hakadosh, also the Panim Yafos, Daflo brings it down, and in Hasidic Sfarim as well, we'll see in a second. So, what is this approach? The Ohr Hachaim brings that the choice here is not, do you want to live or do you want to die? Right? Do you want to be blessed or do you want to be cursed? Because he says what's happening here is that the two things are divided. I'll try to explain. In the pasuk, he says, "Hachayim v'hamoves nasati lefanecha, habrocha v'aklala, ubacharta b'chaim leman tichya tov zarecha." Now, it seems to be two teams. Chaim goes with bracha, moves goes with klala. So why didn't it just lay it out? Right? Hachayim v'abracha, hamoves v'aklala, nasati lefanecha, ubacharta b'chaim. The good guys, the bad guys, choose the good guys. Why is it mixed up? Chaim and moves, okay, those are two extremes. And he says, nasati lefanecha, I put that before you. Bracha and klala, also, I've put before you. What do you choose? Explains the Ohr Hachaim Hakadosh like this. He says there are different ways that a person can motivate themselves in life. There are different ways that a person gets themselves to do that which is really right. And these two ways, they can be ways of education, but they're also ways of just self-education and self-inspiration. What gets you going? One way is Chaim and Moves. The other way is Bracha and Klal. Now, here's where he takes us for surprise. He says Chaim and Moves refer to what happens in this world. In this world, Chaim and Moves. The way you will live your life in this world, or, like we saw, you can live a life where you're physically existing in this world, or it could be Moves. Bracha and Klala, that's what happens after 120. That's what happens in Olam HaEmes. You can end up with Bracha or end up with Klala. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu is saying you have two ways of education here, two ways of inspiration. You can be explaining to people that you will have a good life with Torah in this world. You'll have real life, you'll have real Chaim, and without Torah in this world, it'll be Moves. It'll be a living death. Or you can explain to a person, yeah, whatever in this world, no, but think about Gan Eden. Think about what's going to be. Think about the opposite of Gan Eden, what would be there. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is telling you, don't choose the second. Don't base your avodah on what's going to be in Olam Haba. Base your avoda on the life you'll have in this world, because that's what a person can relate to. Noach once told me, he says, it's very hard to talk to young people nowadays about Olam Haba, because just say, I really don't care about that, because, that's when you're dead. Who cares? Okay, people don't relate to that. But life itself, the fact that your life in this world can either be Chaim and Mavis, that is something that speaks to people. That's something that people can connect to. And that's something which is very important for the vitality with which we connect to Judaism. Right? Rav Moshe Feinstein was famous for saying that a generation was killed when immigrants came to America, and the kids came to them, they said, it's so hard, right? There's no kosher food, there's no Jewish schools, no kosher camp, none of the things were there. And the parents told them, it's hard to be a Jew, right? That's what we're about, suffer. But they said, listen, America is the land of the pursuit of happiness. They didn't come to America to suffer. So they left Torah and found Jewish frameworks that would make things easier for them. The motivation has to be one of how you're going to live actually now. This we find in the Gemara in Brachos, a fascinating instruction for how to deal with the Yetzer Hara. Right? It says, Amar of Levi Bar Chama, Amar Reb Shimon ben Lakish, La'olam yargiz adam Yetzer Hatov al Yetzer Hara. Okay, Sfarim point out, right, every midah that a person has in themselves can be used somehow for positive. Now, kas, anger, rogez, is one of the worst midahs imaginable. You see in the Geras HaRamban and other places. But it does have a certain application. When the Yetzer Hara is messing with you, get angry. Get angry. Let your Yetzer Hatov unleash his anger at the Yetzer Hara for daring to try and get you to do something. That real power of rage that is inside of a person, you should use that on the Yetzer Hara. That's what it means in Tehillim, Rigzu Val Techato. Now, that doesn't always work. It says, Im Nitzcho Muta. If that did it, great. Vim Lav, Yasuk B'Torah. If the Yetzer Hara is still there, alive and kicking and trying to get you into trouble, start learning. Shenemar, the Pasuk continues, Imru Bilvavchem. Learning. Im Nitzcho, if you defeated him, Mutach, that's good. Vim Lav, but if he's still there, Yikra Kriyashma. Say Kriyashma. Shenemar al Mishkavchem. Right? That's like we say on Kriyashma Lamita. Im Nitzcho Mutav, if you defeated the Yetzer with that, that's good. Im Lav, if not, Yazkir lo Yom HaMisa. Right? You should remind either the Yetzer or yourself, different explanations of it, of the day of death. As it says, V'domu Sela, eventually you will be silent. So the question asked by a variety of Mefarshim is, wait a second, we seem to have a gradation here in terms of your weaponry. Right? This first weapon of the Roges. That might not work, learn Torah. That might not work, do Kriya Shema. That might not work, remember Yom HaMisa. You're dealing with the Yetzer Hara. This is a life and death struggle. Why don't you go for the doomsday weapon right away? Yom HaMisa, pull it up, boom, right, finish him off. What do you have to start with playing the games there? So the answer that I saw is a likud from the Gaonim, Ande and Yaakov, and others bring down, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't want us to live that way. We're not supposed to be living, oh, why bother doing this sin? You're just going to die. And when you die, you're going to get in trouble. We're not supposed to be people walking around with Yom HaMisa all the time. We're supposed to be people whose avodah is motivated by life, by the Yetzer Hatov, by the Torah that we learn, by the Kriya Shema where we express Avas Hashem and the love and the Kabbalah Somach Shemaim. That's who and how we're supposed to be. We're not just supposed to be these people who are walking around, you're going to die, you're going to die, what's the point? It's all death. That person's also not really living. He may be able to inspire fear in himself. The Bali Musar say, listen, the Yom HaMavis thing also has got a limited dosage, right? It may shake you up one day, right? But after a while, right, you can sit outside the graveyard and say Lashon Hara sitting on the fence. Don't bother you, right? It's just, eventually, that's what they say. It's true. We do lose it. But here it's more. It's in terms of the environment, the education. It's for life, and it's not for just the idea of what's going to be in Olam Haba. Listen to a fascinating story about a story. I heard this from Moshe Shapira, Zatzal, and he told over a famous story about Reb Aaron Kotler Zatzal, and he said he doesn't believe it. Okay, I'll tell you the story. I'll tell you why he said he doesn't believe it. And again, somebody of that stature who says he doesn't believe it, as I say, the story was Reb Aaron went around, he really killed himself fundraising for a variety of causes, right, for refugees and people, first of all, during the war, after the war, for Chinuch Hatzmai, for Torah Masorah, and for his own yeshiva Lakewood, but he didn't fundraise exclusively for that. So after a day of hard fundraising in Manhattan, he came to the home of one of his supporters who he used to stay with. And the son of that supporter came home after a day of work. He kicked off his shoes and he took out the sports section of the newspaper and he's sitting there. Now, Rav Aaron was a very sharp person. And he said to him, "Why are you wasting your life? Why don't you learn something?" He says, "Rebbe, my father told me that he heard from you that a person who supports Torah in the next world is going to get reward like the one who learns Torah." So they say, Rav Aaron said to him, "I'm not talking about your Olam Haba, I'm talking about your Olam Hazeh." I'm talking about it right now, what it's like. So it's a great story. Rav Moshe says he doesn't believe it because he doesn't believe that Rav Aaron would give credence to such a falsehood, the havamina that you got like money in the bank and therefore you can be mevatel Torah in this world. It'd be like saying, I can talk Lashon Hara because I support Torah. Of course not, right? Whatever share you're going to get in Gan Eden from your support of Torah, that's great. It doesn't give you license. It's not an exchange that you can do Averas because of that. But again, the message of that story was the idea of think about living now. Right? Don't think about, okay, I'm going to get that reward or this reward or that punishment. It doesn't appear in the Torah explicitly. Not that these things don't exist. They're part of our animamins. They're part of our fundamental emunah. But that's not why we do what we do. Right? It's, I tell you, once I was someplace, a certain person in America, a Catholic, decided to ask me a question about religion. Said, "Why do you do what you do?" I said, "I don't know. Why do you do what you do?" All right. And so he said, "Because the priests and the nuns tell us, where you go if you do the right thing and where you go if you do the bad thing, and it's very bad. Is that why you do what you do?" I said, "Not really." I said, "We do have concepts of reward and punishment, but the reason we do what we do is because we want to do what Hashem created us for. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us life and gave us the opportunity to change the universe and history with our smallest action. That's why we do what we do, and we want to bring the world to its purpose for the benefit of all and everyone. Yeah, there's going to be afterwards. It's true. HaKadosh Baruch Hu will decide where I sit in Gan Eden, right? And what I get to eat at the big dinner, right? Which you sang that nice song about. It's all that'll be decided over there, but that's not us.
Rabbi Soloveitchik,
Yeah,
says something very beautifully, a beautiful article. He says that you have to look at the mitzvahs. This is quoting a Catholic theologian.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not going into the whole story, that the mitzvahs are arrows of love shot down by HaKadosh Baruch Hu that pierce the soul.
Oh.
Therefore, the more arrows, the more the soul is pierced, and the closer you feel to HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
Your connection. Yeah, beautiful. So the Racham Strifka Rebbe, who just passed away, right, the Racham Strifka Rebbe of America, he brings down, right, from the Panim Yafos, this very idea. He says that when the Gemara tells you to learn Torah, Torah is called Torah's Chaim. Torah is about life. Torah is not about stepping out of life or not living. It's about life. Torah is called Tov. The Gemara in Bracha says, Ein Tov Torah. Kriya Shema, right? Even though it's a concept of Mesiras Nefesh, but it's an idea of living with Mesiras Nefesh, not, some type of suicide. So the other Eitzah of trying to convince people with Moves and Ra, that's the idea of the Yom HaMisa. And that, he says, is not what we should be choosing because that can make a person sad. And eventually sadness will stop you from Avodas Hashem. Okay? And this is something to be very, very careful from coming to Yom Noraim. Coming to Yom Noraim, people think that it's a mitzvah to be sad. Right? It's not. The Pasuk in Nehemiah says that when people cried at the big Rosh Hashanah gathering they made there, when Edom was there, he said to them, Al tivku, don't cry. L'chu ichlu mashmanim mishtumam takim. Rosh Hashanah is a day of life, and a day of life is a day of happiness. Again, there's ema, there's fear of the din, because the very nature of life is in the balance, and life is that which is most precious to us. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu is being mashpia life to the world. We're saying Zochreinu l'chaim, where he's coming to give life. I once saw on somebody's refrigerator a very wise letter from a school saying, please make sure that your children don't think that on Rosh Hashanah Hashem is angry and wants to kill everybody, because you can see how a little kid can get that wrong message sometimes. That's not the message for what HaKadosh Baruch Hu is doing there. And now here he brings the answer to the question of why in the Gemara they didn't say use Yom HaMisa first, that we don't want to be walking around with the idea of death as our motivator. But why, he says, you'd use it at all in the end. In other words, this is the Hasidic twist on Atzvos is the worst, right? I think it was Shlomo Karliner said that Atzvos isn't listed as an Aver, but it brings to all the Averes, right? So you want to stay away from that. So why, even as a last resort, should you be able to use Yom HaMisa? He explains that after a person learns Torah, and after a person says Kriya Shema, and he absorbs the true outlook on life, then the Yom HaMisa isn't something that's going to make him sad. It may do a little reset for him. It may help him get a sense of proportion, but he's not going to fall into atzvos. A Jew who's truly absorbed the message of Torah is going to be a person who's there with simcha. So these are two approaches to this pasuk in terms of uvacharta b'chaim. Number one is the homework before Rosh Hashanah, is to try and think what we mean when we say Zochreinu l'chaim. Imagine that HaKadosh Baruch Hu answered you. You stand there, Shemar, and say, Zochreinu l'chaim, and he said, what do you mean? What do you mean, what do you mean? I mean, what are you asking for? I don't know, live? I want a life? That's all? I don't know, could I have more money? Sure. What else? I don't know, like healthy? Okay. Anything else? That's all you want? Live, money, healthy? That's it? Think about what it is we want. What that chaim means. Va'atem advekim b'Hashem Elokeichem. Chaim kolchem hayom should all be written down in the Sefer HaChaim.